and that would be lovely. And now, on with the show. So my first question, who here has seen the film Toy Story 3? Okay, so who hasn't seen Toy Story 3? Okay, if you haven't and you don't want a spoiler, this is a spoiler alert, block your ears. Our intrepid band of toys, if you remember, and if you haven't seen it, I'm spoiling the end, are trapped on a conveyor belt of trash, of rubbish, and it's going into an incinerator, yeah? And it's this big funnel thing, and they realise what's happening to them, and they try and start clambering up the trash, but the momentum of the trash is coming down faster than they can crawl up. Do you remember the scene? The people have seen it? And, you know, I cried. I thought, oh my God, Disney is going to end this prequel with death. And I was like, oh my God. And then the claw comes down, yeah? And it magically saves them. Those three-eyed things have got the claw. Scoop them out. And you got to hit them with an image, James.
I like it.
So my argument is, this species is clambering up off the conveyor belt, but what's happened, without us really fully understanding it, is that the momentum of the downward trash is sucking us into the fiery pit of hell. Okay? And from the 1950s onwards, since before I was born, since before you were born, we have been accelerating our use of raw materials, whether it's fresh water, soil, wood, etc. And in the 1960s and 70s, there was a lot of alarm. We are using up resources faster than they're being replenished. And right-wing economists like Julian Simon said, never fear, human ingenuity will solve it. When we exploit and collapse one resource, we'll invent something else because the price will go up, inventors will come in, everything will be okay. Are you guys familiar with that argument? Okay, a guy called Julian Simon, S-I-M-O-N. What has happened since then is that environmental scientists have realised it's not how much we're using up, it's how much capacity the planet has to absorb our toxic waste. And the number one thing of waste that you guys should be worried about is...
Plastic bags.
Not plastic bags, anyone else? Carbon dioxide. We use the atmosphere as a sewer, okay? We burn coal, we burn oil, we burn natural gas, because those are the ways that we get our energy. Nuclear, hydro, solar power, wind power, those are a statistical anomaly. The way that this species gets its energy is oil, coal and gas. So when we do that, we release more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So James asked you for some numbers. I'm going to ask you for a number. What is the concentration of carbon dioxide in parts per million in the atmosphere at the minute? More or less. Any takers? You see this, and I'm not blaming you guys, but this is crucial. Because you are an intellectual elite. Believe it or not. You may get your marks back from this horrible woman here who gives you low marks, but you are an intellectual elite. I'm not getting a beer, am I?
No! Your beer quota was decreasing.
To answer your question, to answer my question rather, it's about 397 parts per million, which sounds like nothing. What would happen if there was no carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? At all? Any takers? We wouldn't be on this planet. We wouldn't be having this conversation. The carbon dioxide traps a certain amount of heat. So what happens if you double the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from what it was pre-industrial, which was 280 parts per million? What happens if you put it up to 560? Which we are going to do this century in your lifetimes. What happens? The temperature rises. Not evenly, more at the Arctic and the Antarctic, but everywhere. So when you put more energy into a system, when you trap more heat, you get more intense typhoons, like the one we've just seen in the Philippines. They won't necessarily be more frequent, but when they happen, they'll hit you very hard. What happens to your agriculture systems when there's a heat wave for 3 weeks and the nighttime temperature is a lot higher than it used to be, than it normally is. What happens to wheat? It doesn't germinate. So what do you guys eat when there's no wheat? Yeah? So I'm trying to get you to understand that it's not just about how much of wood, water, whatever we use up. It's what we do with the waste products. So yes, we have been a phenomenally successful species. There have been local die-offs. So James, there was an allusion earlier to the potato famine. I want to make a point. Food was being exported from Ireland during that famine. It's just that the poor people weren't allowed to eat it. So famines are not necessarily an absolute lack of food. It's a lack of money for people to be able to buy food. Okay, so that was one localised crash. The population of Ireland before the potato famine was about 8 million. What is it now? Any takers? It's about 4 million. And young Irish people keep leaving. My grandmother left Ireland because there weren't the economic opportunities. So I'm lumbered with the middle name of Seamus. So, another local population crash. What happened in Europe in 1347, 1349, 1351? Takers? Any historians among us? The Black Death? Bubonic Plague? Population crash from 75 million to about 50 million. Unbelievable economic and social consequences. There's a book by Barbara Tuchman, Tuchman, called A Distant Mirror. Should be well worth a read. Right, next question. Who's been to Singapore? A few of us have been to Singapore. Okay. Has anyone stayed at the Raffles Hotel? 5-star hotel? No? Me neither. Stanford Raffles was one of these people who went round for the British Empire, creating the empire. There's a lovely quote, and I can almost do it off the top of my head, but anyway, I'll have to because I've not got the quote here. He turns up in Singapore, and he looks at all these people who know who white people are. I mean, white people have been mucking around for a long time, but no one's ever bothered to plant a flag and say, this is ours, you work for us now. So he turns up there, and that's his intention, and he looks around, and he looks. These people are getting everything they need from the palm trees and local produce, and anything that they can't get themselves, they're trading with other people on around about. But the palm trees for them are their main source of sort of economy. He can't govern them because he doesn't have anything that they need. So what does he do? If you're Stanford Raffles, what would you do?
Take away the palm trees.
Cut down the palm trees. Because then they're in your pocket. So, a book that I would highly recommend, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, by a guy called Walter Rodney, R-O-D-N-E-Y. While I'm here, and while you're writing, that's very encouraging, a brilliant book by a guy called Noam Chomsky, and the book is called World Orders Old and New. And what is worth understanding is that when the whites went to a lot of these other countries, America, South America, Africa, they didn't find a bunch of peasants sitting around waiting to be saved. They found highly developed, organised, wealthy societies, and they cut down the countries in order to underdevelop these countries to create slaves. So why did people come to Manchester from Ireland during the potato famine? Because their land had been taken away from them. Highland clearances? Anyone? Highland clearances obviously was in Scotland. But the Industrial Revolution, don't forget, all of these people had to come to these cities because their livelihood, the land that they were farming, had been taken away from them because the people who owned the land could make more profit from having sheep on the land than having humans. So development and underdevelopment is what they call, the Marxists call, a dialectic process. It's interactive. It's not white people in Europe, and this isn't what James was saying, but there is this idea that white people in Europe are the ones with the technology, the science, the cleverness, and they give it to everyone else. That's not how the world works at all. Right. Two more things, and then I want to go into questions. Technology will save us. So the new cars that all these people in China are going to drive are going to be twice as efficient. Isn't that great? What happens if there's 4 times as many people driving? The cars are twice as efficient, but your overall amount of pollution that you've put into the atmosphere is more. Does that make sense? Another thing for you to Google this time, it's not a whole book I'm going to make you read, it's called Jevons Paradox, Jevons. Jevons Paradox says that you do not get reductions in the overall amount of a product being consumed from efficiency savings. What happens is your product gets more efficient, the price goes down, so more people are then able to use that product, leading to an overall rise in the amount of resources used. So politicians love to talk about efficiency because it's motherhood and apple pie. But it doesn't actually bend the curve of resources used down. Right, I'm almost done, I promise. Yeah, I'm going to skip right to the end. A man falls off the Eiffel Tower. Now let's say, not the Eiffel Tower, Beetham Tower. And every floor on the way down, witnesses hear him saying, so far so good, so far so good, so far so good. And what you've heard from James is that the species is saying, so far so good, so far so good, so far so good. So thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to get up there for some questions?
Do you want the questions filmed?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.